My friends, if we're not careful, we could look upon Jesus' ministry as an enemy to the wealthy and the rich. At first glance, doesn't it seem that many times he's kind of against anybody who's rich? And previous to today's readings, in the last few weeks, we've heard it's easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And remember, in Luke's version of the Beatitudes a few weeks back, we heard the woe to side. Woe to you, rich, for you have received your consolation. And all throughout the Gospels, we seem to hear this message about Jesus and the rich. A person who has riches in his life will find it difficult to follow in Jesus' footsteps and enter into the next eternal life. And today is a real prime example of that same message in the parable about the rich man and Lazarus. And it drives home the point in an especially poignant way. Jesus, remember, is speaking to Pharisees who have at least somewhat of a belief in the afterlife. And he uses that. That's important. He uses that to really poke them in the face and make his point. And he uses their belief and our belief in the afterlife to make that point to us. He makes us uncomfortable. Let's look at the story. The rich man is described in detail. He's fine purple garments. He dines on rich, sumptuous meals. He has fine linens. And we see that his elaborate wealth, that he lives far above most of the people of his time. And he's pitted against poor Lazarus. Jesus gives us enough detail here too. He lies on the ground at this guy's door all the time. He has sores all over his body. He's hungry. And the dogs would come and lick those sores. Truly somebody who, in the eyes of the earth, is at the bottom of the scale in the earthly life. You might even say that what we're seeing here is someone who is extremely successful in this life, and someone who is, let's be frank, a failure in this life. And he sets that stage for his audience, the Pharisees, and for you and I as well. Now comes what I like to call the flip. Many times Jesus takes these parables and he sets up the stage, but then he flips it upside down to make a real important point. And our story is no exception. And we can think of the Beatitudes. They seem to have negative and weak attributes that Jesus says are the important way to live out our gospel message. He flips it around. Well, today in our parable we see that after both men die, the worldly success is turned into spiritual failure. The rich man, you might say he's in the netherworld, you might say he's suffering the pains of hell. Lazarus, on the other hand, the failure, is welcomed into the kingdom and carried there by angels. This looks to be a pretty good indictment about being wealthy or being rich. But Jesus' message is deeper. Because if you look at it, the sin of the rich man still continues. He wants to treat Lazarus like his servant and his slave. He says, have him give me some water. Have Lazarus wait on me. And if not that, have him go to see my brothers. Have Lazarus wait on me. That's the sin of the rich man. He continues even after this life to be selfish, that he's treating him like a slave. But the rich man learns one thing, doesn't he? There's no going back. This is a strong message. We hear everything about God's mercy and kindness and forgiveness, and that's true. And in this life, we always get a do-over. But that clock will run out. That time will be ended when we are in the face of God, and there are no more do-overs. And our life has to stand on its own for what we've done and how we've shared our life and what kind of disciples we've been. Now this brings us to the attitude about Jesus, his attitude towards the rich. This message is not new. He was just really using the same message that we see in Amos today and several weeks ago. Famous Amos, not the one with the cookies, but famous Amos, who told the Jews how wrong it was to not care for those who are poor, to not care for those who are in any kind of need that they could serve themselves. Jesus took that same message and made it a part of his ministry, didn't he? And he knows that he reinforces this message for those Pharisees, but also he knows that it's important for us as future generations, because he knows how difficult it is for someone who is materially well off or wealthy to not give credit where credit is due. It doesn't take great wealth or a lot of money for each of us to look around and be a little bit selfish, to be overly proud of what I've done. Look at what I've accomplished. And we lose that sense of humility and the candor that we really need to admit that everything I have is a gift. And when it gets down to it, that's the same for each and every one of us. There's nothing that I can point to, nothing you can point to that is solely yours. Now, I could stand up here for a long time and give you all kinds of things that I've accomplished in my life and all the things that I've done and the positive achievements that I've had. But in the end, they're all blessings from God. They're not something that I own. They're gifts. That's reality. Riches are not the problem. You can be poor and be selfish, and you can be rich and be generous. The problem is our attitude towards what we have and not taking what we have and acting accordingly. And when we ignore that reality, that's what caused the rich man to be able to pass by day after day, walk by that door, and either see him there and ignore him, or eventually not even see him and overlook him and pass by and not even be concerned or cared about anything for Lazarus. And it doesn't take long for us to start taking credit for too many things in our own life. And we can lose that humility because we can realize that nothing we can accomplish without God. Ignoring that reality can cause us to fall into the same trap as the rich man. Well, what are those riches that can cause us to fall into this trap? It's anything and everything that blocks my relationship with God. Anytime that I become so selfish that I forget the message that God has given to each one of us to be his servant and his disciple, we're falling into that trap, no matter how much or how little we may have. But we can vaccinate ourselves from falling into that pitfall by recognizing and continually reminding ourselves that without God, we have nothing. We don't really own anything, do we? Everything is on loan from God. Even our very life and our time here is temporary. And with that, we have the purpose of being a good disciple and messengers of the good news. That's what we're supposed to do with what God has given us. To live our lives as a proclamation that salvation is available to all and everyone through Jesus Christ. You know, it occurs to me that if I could change some of my own attitudes and patterns of thinking, and maybe even my patterns of speaking, it would probably drive the point home more fully to me. What if I never ever again used the word mine? Instead of claiming anything as mine, what if I just said, yeah, that's a gift from God, and I'm trying to figure out how to use it while it's on loan to me? Then I might continually remind myself that it's my job to use everything for God's purpose, and know that by subjugating my needs to God's plan, that's the best for me and for everyone around me in the long run. And instead of falling into that pattern of the rich man in the parable, I would be willing to share what already belongs to God, no matter how little or how much I may have. Jesus' teachings are clear and sometimes uncomfortable. We each have a responsibility to share what we have to someone in need without reservation, without judgment, only looking for no compensation in return. Our compensation will come from God, and then we will all be building up treasures in heaven.